Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 10th Forums International webinar. My name is Laurie Beagle. I'm Managing Director of Forums International. And I'm very, very pleased to say we now have Nigel Dickinson, Head of Partnerships at our corporate partner Graydon with us today, who's going to take you through understanding overseas trading partners. If you have any questions, please use the chat button at the bottom of the screen. And what we'll do is we'll pick up all of the questions towards the end after Nigel's presentation. We are recording this, and next week after the bank holiday, a copy will be available on the Forums International website. Okay, so let's get started. So for those of you who don't know us, give you a little bit of background. Sorry if you've heard this before, but Forums International started in 2015. However, we have been running forums since January 1991, where we formed what was the CMIG at the time, is now the CPF. That's had 160 meetings, or it's 160 meetings come up in July, and I think I've chaired 158 of those. Now, our objective very much is to provide a forum for professionals to meet and discuss key trading challenges, share experiences, create new and best practices, and very importantly, discuss how to succeed in the future. Attendance is for all levels of credit professionals, so managers, controllers, whatever the job title is. And we only have pre-approved corporate partners attending, so we confirm to you that you will never intentionally be sold to when attending a forum. Currently, we have 10 forums in our portfolio. Our newest is the Fraud Prevention Network, which we launched last week, very, very successfully. I'm not going to run through all of these, but just give you a little idea. The Credit Professionals Forum is the one which is 28 years old, through to the SAP user group, which is for frustrated SAP users. We are very, very proud to be supported by the corporate partners you see on the screen in front of you. This year, in January, we became a CICM corporate partner, and I'd like to give all our partners a very, very big thank you for all their support, and so far, and also for going forward. So why are we different? Firstly, our agendas are decided by the members. At the end of each meeting, we get feedback forms. They give us their suggestions, and together with the steering committee, we then form the next agenda for the next meeting, which is going to be relevant and what the members ask us for. Importantly, our forums are not lecture-based, so we don't just sit in rows of seats. They are interactive workshops and discussion. Excuse me, and discussions. A quick sip. The sessions are 50-50 based, so 50% is led by a subject matter expert, and approximately the other 50% is where we get the attendees to share their experiences. That is very, very powerful when you put those two things together. Our forums provide opportunities for attendees to attend, discuss key trading issues and challenges and opportunities, of which, of course, there are many today. And we also want to hear about successes as well. So we want to hear from our members on where they've succeeded or where they've tried and perhaps not succeeded, and that's all goodness. So our objectives. Number one is for our members and attendees to network with their peers. Also to gain tools and techniques. We try and bring new things to the members as often as we can. Increase those skill levels through the workshops and the training sessions. Where appropriate, for them to gather information and intelligence and hopefully safeguard their businesses. And you'll hear this a lot: develop new and best practices. And also improve a team's productivity and results. So there are always things that our members can take back to their offices and utilize in the office space. Our mission is very much that everybody takes at least one thing away from coming to each meeting. Return on investment. Well, the investment is your time. So we want to make sure that you actually get a return on that. We plan our meetings in a year in advance. In August this year, we will be planning 2020. So we'll be telling you what the dates are well in advance. We have a LinkedIn and Facebook groups set up. Please have a look at those. In fact, I put something on LinkedIn today regarding our pharmaceutical and medical devices forum. So if you're in that sector, please have a look. We have a website with a secure members area. So we need an ID and password, but that houses past presentations, workshops, useful information. So great place to go. We have a knowledge hub so that you actually can talk to the other members on a 24/7 basis, ask questions, share information across the forums. I'm very, very proud to be a CICM member, and attending our forums, you can earn CPD points or hours. So another good reason to come along. We are supported by a pre-approved and contracted major corporate partners, which you saw on the previous slide. But you also have access to some of the major industry subject matter experts. We have a lot of those who come along, present, and some of them come back again on a regular basis. And there is a membership fee, but dare I say, we're cheaper than training and perhaps a little bit more fun. Now I can list the hundreds of agenda items that we've covered over the years, but this just will give you a bit of a flavour. And these are some of the recent ones, from automation to cash flow forecasting, to cultural differences, to GDPR. We all enjoyed that one. Query management, and of course the one that's missing at the bottom, Brexit. So what's happening in 2019? We already have held a one-day credit card forum in March, which was very, very successful. We've had an ICT forum for a long time. In fact, it started in 1998. We're actually re-energizing that this year and expanding it, and we've added electronics into that group. So watch this space for more announcements. Pharmaceutical forum's been going since 2016, and we're extending that now to international manufacturers. We had an Amazon day last year, great success. We're now going to run a second one called Amazon The Return, and also we're going to be running a retail day as well. Both of those will be in London. We're also going to be running, I think it's 9 items with the CICM, from roundtables, workshops and webinars. So again, social media is the place to get the news, and also our website, of course. One of the key things is that not everybody can leave the desk. So we now offer virtual attendance. So it's a bit like what you're doing now. It's a bit like a webinar. The only difference is that you can hear us, and we will be able to hear you, and you also be able to see the slides as well. So it actually has brought a very, very new dimension to the forum, especially for those who have to travel a long way or outside the country. So in summary, we are all time poor, and we understand that. But with our forums, we want to make sure you get that benefit and the added value, which actually equates to the time that you actually put into it. So we know that taking time out of the office is a luxury. Our forums are not just meetings, but they are communities. Whether they meet 3 times a year, 4 times a year, we actually have the ability to stay in contact with our members and the members with each other on a 24/7 basis. We're providing a vehicle for our members to learn those new skills, address new challenges. I'll say it again, develop new and best practices, and network and share experiences with their peers. Very, very important. It's not free, but the first meeting is free. We would very much like you to come along to a meeting, meet the members, meet us, gauge for yourself, see the benefits, all before you make any commitment to join. So I'd now like to hand over to Nigel, and who's now going to take you through understanding overseas trading partners. Over to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Laurie, for that introduction, and thanks also for the opportunity to present this afternoon. I'm just taking control of the presentation here, so with luck we should see what I'm going to be speaking about, and here's a short agenda of what I'm going to be talking about for the next 20 minutes or so. So I'll start off with a quick introduction to myself and to Graydon. I'm going to spend a few moments just talking about the status of information in the UK and how that kind of spoils us a little bit and sets expectations. Moving on from that, talk a little bit about global registries and just give an overview of how the information available and the service levels available can vary quite dramatically. I'll then talk about the types of coverage and information that is available on overseas companies from the credit reporting agencies, and then finally talk about some of the other cultural, political and legal considerations that are important to understand when doing business overseas. So in terms of introduction, I am now with Graydon for about 18 months. I did spend a large part of my career with one of the larger credit reference agencies. In between those two things, I also worked for a business information company that specializes in working with global registries, and picked up some experience of moving in that world, which I'll share. But starting off with a bit more information about who Graydon is. We've been in the UK as Graydon UK Limited since 1987, but we do trace our roots back to 1870. So we have a long and proud tradition here in the UK. We are these days owned by Graydon Holdings in the Netherlands, with another sister company in Belgium. So those three operating companies around Europe. And in the UK, we have a disproportionately high amount of our business which is generated through the sales of non-UK reports, i.e. reports on international businesses. And also a fair proportion of our customers, 10% or so, are based overseas, and I'll share some of those names with you in a moment. We're very pleased to be working with forums, have been doing so for a number of years in many of those forums that Laurie mentioned earlier. We are an Atradius Group company. I'm sure most people in the audience will recognise Atradius as the large credit insurer, also based in the Netherlands. The stats you see on this slide relate primarily to our UK operations. So I won't linger on these, but these are just to underline the bona fides of Graydon in the UK, I guess. So when you look at our international customers, you see very quickly that we're dealing with many other people who are broadly in the same line of business as ourselves. So the credit insurers, collections agencies, other credit reporting agencies. So we do have a great network of people that we're selling to and indeed buying from. And it is important to us that we maintain those relationships and we're able to offer the best information from each of the local markets on which we report. So many of these relationships are two-way relationships where we're both buying and selling information. So moving on then to just a few thoughts on the status of business information, company information in the UK. And I would suggest that we are spoilt, if that's the right word, but certainly we do have a company register here in the UK, which I would argue leads the world in terms of its accessibility and the amount of information that is available through Companies House. So companies in the UK tend to file more information than companies anywhere else in the world, and that information is freely available to the public. And I stress freely because these days you can go to the company's website and freely download the latest company's documents with a very slick user interface, all of which has been put in place over the last 2 or 3 years and has proved to be an excellent service. So we uniquely have very effective access to such information here in the UK. That situation doesn't really exist anywhere else in the world. At supporting that that position in the UK, then we are well represented in terms of the credit reference agencies that operate in the UK. So 7 major credit reference agencies exist. You don't need me to run through the names, but in addition to that, a number of smaller suppliers also operate. So it's a fairly competitive market, which means that customers are well served for UK information. And in the UK economy, there is a culture of openness and transparency. So we are all of a mind that information should be shared. Being transparent in business is the right thing to do, and that leads to a culture of information being available. I would say Companies House isn't perfect. There are still things it can do to improve, but some of you might have noticed that it has just launched a consultation exercise, which Graydon will be pleased to be participating in, both individually and through our trade organisation, the Business Information Providers Association. Other aspects of information sharing in the UK, trade data, sharing of trade data and payment data is well established. Business suppliers readily share that information with the credit reference agencies. The banks are increasingly getting involved in information sharing, and particularly some of the initiatives launched by the British Business Bank in recent years are accelerating that. And even government agencies are starting to share information with one another. So we're aware that HMRC and Companies House are starting to share information which has previously been behind high walls. And just to finish up on the UK situation, we also have sophisticated scoring and analytics and modelling capabilities, and very flexible data and software solutions, not always available in every other market which you might be interested in. So thinking about company registries, and I'm thinking about company registries primarily because the first level of information upon which credit reports tend to be based, and the starting point for any type of investigation tends to be, let's go and find the information that's available from the local registry, whether that's in the UK or France or Gabon or Japan or wherever. So it is always the starting point. First thing to know is that there are around 400 registries where companies have to file information in just over 200 countries. So it's not a straight one-for-one relationship. The primary reason for that is covered in the next bullet point, that registries can be local or national, or perhaps not exist at all. But in the USA, for instance, there is an individual registry for each of the US states. The same sort of situation exists in Switzerland. So many countries have multiple registries. So when you're using them, it's important to know where the company that you're interested in is based. And if you don't have that basic information to start with, that can be problematic. Increasingly, company registries around the world are available online, but it is still the minority of companies that have got all of their information up online. Many in some of the harder parts of the world to deal with remain offline, and there's no immediate prospects of them changing in the near future. Also, be aware that we are, again, lucky in the UK that information is freely available from Companies House. In most other countries around the world, you do have to pay to access information, and in some of those jurisdictions, you have to pay substantially to use that information. And also, the information isn't always publicly accessible to us as members of the public or as members of the business community. So for very many jurisdictions, information from the local or the national registry will only be made available to a party that is a registered agent. In a small number of cases, the registered agent has to visit the registry physically in person. That is a very small number, but again, be aware that these sorts of strictures do exist around the world. So we're not dealing with a level playing field at all. And that's before you even get to the understanding how much data is actually on file. And again, that can vary dramatically from country to country. So all of this you'll understand is why specialist agencies do exist, specifically to source company documents from multiple jurisdictions. Turning now to the credit reference agencies, most of the big name credit reference agencies will say that they have global coverage, Graydon included. But just be aware that doesn't necessarily mean that they have operating companies in every country. Most, if not all, of the global CRAs have networks of associations, sometimes branded networks, sometimes not. So everyone is sourcing from local suppliers in some way or other for at least part of their network. And you might know, if you're in the habit of buying international credit reports on a regular basis, there is really no such thing as a global format. Whilst you might see the same sort of information, for example, for Western Europe, once you get outside that to Africa or Asia, then you'll start to see reports that look very different from one another and contain very different information. Reports versus data is there just as a reminder that if you are interested in taking data rather than a report to read, data that can be fed into some sort of software package, then that isn't always freely available as well. So sometimes a report, an old-fashioned PDF, for instance, might be all that's available for some countries. The whole concept of having an online database, again, widely understood, and the benefits used in the UK. So pretty much all of the reports on all of the businesses will be kept up to date all of the time by sophisticated data feeds. For many other countries, and again, places like Latin America, Africa and Asia, reports tend to be written on demand. So if you are taking a report from one of these sorts of areas, it is important to just double check the date on which that report has been written to make sure it has been done recently. Other variances you'll see from all credit reference agencies, XML, HTML versus PDF, of course, and also pricing. You will have seen varies dramatically from region to region. So I'm just going to quickly go through the sorts of data that are available for the main regions around the world, starting with Western Europe. Most of Western Europe, you'll see the same sort of information as you see in the UK. Perhaps the one exception really is the existence of payment and trade information that is more widely available in the UK than most of the other markets around Europe. Also note that there are nuances, there are differences from country to country. So, for instance, Netherlands companies are not obliged to file shareholder information if there are more than 2 shareholders. There's no register of shareholders in Sweden, etc., etc. So all these little nuances do exist to trip you up. Staying on Western Europe, full accounts are available for most countries throughout Western Europe, but there are many notable exceptions. They tend to be the smaller countries, but do note Switzerland, Austria, and Ukraine are also on that list, and substantial economies, all of them, of course. You'll also see amongst the smaller countries on the list, countries that are favoured as being tax havens, and of course the attraction for some companies to file and trade out of these countries can be the fact that they're not obliged to file the same level of full information that is required in the UK, France, Germany, etc. Not the only reason, of course, but just something to be aware of and watch out for. Moving on to the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, you would normally see the basic information such as incorporation, legal form, who the key directors and shareholders are, subsidiaries and branches. You would rarely see a financial statement for a business. For some reason, Morocco seems to be the exception to that rule. And also be aware, if you're looking at reports from a credit reference agency, then much of the information that within that report may have been supplied by the subject company themselves. Looking at Asia, similar picture. The financial statements, again, rarely available. Officially, they are available for China and India and Malaysia and Singapore, but for 3 of those countries, as you see at the bottom, there is no guarantee that you will actually be able to get them practically, so it can be a bit hit and miss whether they are actually available. In the US and Canada, you would see a little bit more information. Payment experiences are more commonly used and available in the US and Canada in the absence of financial data, accounts, and so on. Financial statements only tend to be available for public companies, but be aware, particularly for the US, that the rules do differ from state to state. So the 50 states and 50 different jurisdictions with different filing requirements, and some of those are much more stringent than others, of course. With Nebraska being the one with the lowest bar. So having just quickly tripped around the main regions, once you kind of got a feel for the amount of data that can be available, and you've got your credit report or your company documents, whatever else, then other things to be aware of, other cultural considerations. Just be aware of the acceptance of the concept of credit reporting. We hear on a fairly regular basis, particularly from the Middle East, that it can be frowned upon to be taking out a credit report on a trading partner. There is very much a culture in some countries in the Middle East and elsewhere that once you've shaken on a deal, the old-fashioned, your word is your bond, and it can be frowned upon if you're found to be taking out a credit report on someone you've done a deal with. So be aware of those sorts of sensitivities. It's a rule of thumb that countries that are bigger exporters and have a high proportion of exports as a percentage of their GDP do tend to be more open and more accepting of the concept of credit reporting, but do just tread carefully. Something else to think about, public holidays. I mean, it sounds obvious, and forgive me if this is a bit too obvious, but just do bear in mind that just because we all close in the UK for a week or so over the Christmas holidays, that doesn't mean that your potential and actual trading partners abroad are doing the same thing. And some of you may have recognised the flag on the bottom right hand there. That's the flag of Iran. When I was working for a company that did provide company documents, it was during the time that sanctions were lifted on Iran, and we were able to access, for the first time for many years, the Iranian registry for company information, which felt like a big step forward. What we didn't realise, and what took us quite some time to get used to, was the number of religious holidays that there actually are in Iran when public buildings and public offices are actually closed and unavailable. So getting your head around that and just being able to plan for those holidays is important if you're a regular trader in these parts of the world. Some political considerations. Clearly the trade war, if you'll forgive me using that term, or potential trade war with China, is creating a great deal of uncertainty about potential future tariffs and the whole climate for trade with China going forward. One Asian credit agency that we deal with did tell us just a few days ago that it's already having impact on the entire region that they deal with. So a great deal of uncertainty out in Asia as to how their economies are going to be impacted by the negotiations with the US. Have a think about currency controls. You might be dealing with a company that has got impeccable credit credentials, but if currency controls exist in their country, there might be issues with getting payments in and out, of course. And the same thing for strikes. Again, you might be dealing with an impeccable business partner, but if you're shipping goods or flying goods in and there are strikes or habitual industrial arrest at the docks or the airports, then you can have problems that you didn't foresee if you're not doing your homework. And more local issues like potentially are coming up in South Africa. We've seen in Zimbabwe with land reform and nationalisation of companies in the farming sector, for instance. Just arm yourselves with the right information and just checks what's happening with the politics and the economics of the place that you're going to be doing business within, as well as the detail of the actual companies themselves. A couple of legal considerations came to me as I was pulling this presentation together. One relates back to China, that a few years ago, it's maybe 6 or 7 years ago now, there was a well-established practice that CRAs used agents to access information from the equivalent of Companies House in China. Overnight, at one point, that practice was deemed to be illegal, and the agents and indeed employees of CRAs that had been using the agents were put in jail overnight. And that situation prevailed for some months before it was resolved. So during that time, that had a significant impact on the amount of information that was available for Chinese companies, as the CRAs had to review their whole presence in that market, what information was legally publishable, and were they procuring it through the right processes. There are occasions when information from a tax authority and a National Statistics Bureau can differ from the same company. who's to say though that situation does exist in the UK as well, because it's by no means certain that everyone files exactly the same information to HMRC as they do to Companies House, of course. In France, you might be interested to know, if you don't already know, that all businesses have to register. So France is probably the country with the most robust coverage of all of the businesses that operate in the economy. Everyone from a hairdresser to a bicycle repair shop to a babysitter has to register in France. And also a very current consideration I just thought might be of interest. In Poland, following the GDPR legislation, there was a very quick challenge to Bisnode in Poland, suggesting that they needed to contact all the individuals that were running non-limited businesses by post to confirm in writing that they were publishing information and providing credit reports. And that information is going through the Polish appeals process as we speak, and that will undoubtedly end up with the in the EU courts, because it's the EU legislation that is being questioned. So that could have considerable impact on the amount of information available for non-limited entities. A couple of thoughts on global corporate ownership. Clearly, you can take great lengths to look at the one company that you're interested in and satisfy yourselves about all of the pertinent details about that individual company, but that might be part of a larger family tree, and those family trees can often have a global reach. So do try and establish who the ultimate trading company is, who the ultimate owner is, and why the company you're dealing with is based in that jurisdiction. 9 times out of 10, if not 99 times out of 100, there will be a perfectly legitimate reason. But watch out for the companies that are based in the tax havens to avoid tax or to keep their affairs private. And we all know that the names of the places that come up time and time again, like Panama and the Cayman Islands, where their economies are substantially built on attracting those sorts of companies to base themselves there. Be aware, of course, additional security does exist in the form of using a collections agency or taking out credit insurance. Traders is our parent, but of course others do exist. You can check out quite quickly which countries they will cover and which they don't, and they will differ slightly, and again, which ones they cover will be of interest and give you a little more insight into the risk of doing business in those particular countries. And I'm going to finish just with a couple of slides which are back to Graydon. As I referenced earlier, we are using a network of suppliers around the world for all the countries other than UK, Netherlands and Belgium, where we actually have our own operations. And I thought it might be just of some interest just to show the type of organisations we're dealing with to supply us with our information. That was the world. This one is the UK, of course. And to finish, because of all the complexities that I hope I've given an insight into, then we do have a dedicated international operations team that supports all our customers who are taking out international reports, of course. So we've been providing that team and their support since 1990. Round about 5,000 reports a month, substantial experience within the team and multi-language, not only to serve our customers, but also to have the relevant negotiations with our suppliers to make sure we're getting the best service for them. So I'm not going to claim that we're exclusive in having an international support team, but I would say, you know, we have been in this part of the business for many years, and feel we do and can offer a good service. So I think I'm coming to the end of my time. I'll wrap up there. That's me. You'll see my details in the presentation after the event, should you wish to go and find them. And at that point, I'll hand back to Laurie.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Nigel. Very, very interesting, and hopefully everybody will like to take that presentation away, because I think there's some fantastic facts there. I've got a couple of questions for you. First one is, why are international credit reports so expensive compared to the UK?
Well, I suppose, yes, thank you. I suppose that relates to the fact that the UK markets, going back to the beginning of my presentation, is the information is so freely available, and there are so many players in the market that it is a very competitive place to be. Agencies have been looking at ways of cutting costs for many, many years now. Once you get outside the UK, and particularly outside of Western Europe, where we are on something of a par, then you can be into significant costs for both sourcing the basic information from Companies House, but then also, of course, as I also mentioned earlier, we tend to be buying in the information from third parties, and so there's an element of markup to make it profitable business for us. So multiple factors, but at the heart of it all, it's the availability of the information cost effectively in the first place.
Yeah, you did a good job of explaining where you can get information from different places and can't get it from others. Put you on the spot here. What's the most difficult country to get information from?
That's kind of interesting. We used to have a phrase. I don't know if it's politically correct to use it anymore, but it was the axis of evil, which were the countries that were prescribed to do business with by the US. So on that list was North Korea, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. I'd say North Korea kind of remains at the top of that list. It was a frustrating and remains a frustrating position to have to deal with as a credit reference agency, because you would want to be able to notify customers of companies that have links, i.e. ownership in those markets. Because you're not allowed to operate within those markets, you can't really establish whether there is a link to them or not sometimes. So it's a bit of a funny one, but yes, I'd say North Korea is probably still top of that list.
Okay, why am I not surprised? Right. Anybody else got any more questions out there? We've still got quite a few people on the call today. No? Okay, well, all I can say is I hope you enjoyed it. I did. As I say, the whole recording of this will be available early next week. Bank holiday gets in the way a little bit. But our next webinar is the 5th of June. And actually it's ourselves, Graydon, and we're doing it with the CICM. The subject is fraud, the fastest growing industry. And actually it's also going to be an introduction to our new forum, the Fraud Prevention Network. So lots of facts coming out of that and lots of news. So thanks again for joining us, and hopefully we'll hear you or see you in the near future.